Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Thor. Really because of Loki and everything like that popping off on Disney Plus, I'm sure retroactively a lot of people are going through like the Norse mythology stuff, and plus also going through the Thor movies to eventually make their way to Loki and watch that and just kind of consistently go back into Thor-ish like stuff because they're getting prepared for the weekly episodic thing that is to be Loki. Sadly enough, there isn't really much of things to get back into WandaVision. There's like a couple of movies here and there, but like it's a lot of just like, hey, whatever Avengers movie you could find, uh, and then go into WandaVision. So, like going for this one, I really just wanted to just consistently start chipping away at some of these origin stories. Like I've gone and done Iron Man, I've gone and done Captain America, and I'm starting to like chip away at some of these, and some of them are probably more difficult than others just because there's a whole science behind it, especially in this one where they're talking about like Einstein's Rosen bridge and Yggdrasil's, the tree of Yggdrasil's, and all kinds of stuff, sciencey things in this thing. So if you're looking at a science explanation of any of this stuff, you'd be probably heading into the wrong review. Because I know a lot of people want insights and stuff like that of this stuff, but I'm just a guy that tells you how I feel about this movie and then go into the spoilers about this film and just talk about the film, recite it or whichever. I do like. I could say that this movie is a fun film for someone who has probably never watched it before, and if you haven't, then that's okay. Like everybody can take their Marvel films in certain kind of strides or whatever, because there's a crap ton of them to have to go through. Um, I think that this movie is fun, but I think there's a lot of other Thor movies that are much more funner. Like this one kind of goes into us getting an origin story of these people, and we have Thor like acting all like serious through most of this movie, and he has to be this like stubborn guy that is just wanting to destroy and battle and whatever. And eventually it takes to a bulk of this film where he's starting to realize that that's not how he should be uh, living his life, and that's not how he should be like trying to rule with an iron fist kind of thing. And eventually he comes to that realization when he is basically stuck on Earth. That once he has gone to a place where there isn't battles all the time, there isn't a war brewing every single minute of the day, Thor is to like kind of calm his mind and just realize that like maybe like it was a mistake to do what I've been doing. And because basically I think what happened to Thor is like, and some people don't realize this, like when you see other kind of Asgardian or Thor like things, like these guys are constantly at war all the time. It's like an ongoing thing. Like these guys like have wars going on 24/7 in Asgard or any of the other nine realms. So really when you like really have so much time devoted to any kind of number of battles or wars or whatever, like that's all that gets stuck into your brain. And I guess really once Thor really goes onto Midgard, which is Earth, like he starts to decompress and starts to realize, you know what, maybe maybe battling isn't always the answer. Maybe a war isn't always the answer. And like he took like seeing Midgard where it seems like there isn't a war brewing every second of the day to just decompress from his like seemingly like stress that he was like building up so much in Asgard to eventually realize, you know what, maybe like Midgard is doing something good. Like maybe Midgard is something that isn't the same as Asgard, and then there isn't wars brewing all the time because really, people try to avoid it, and that's not Thor's way. That's not Thor's way of thinking because he's just known war all his life. And I think that's a pretty interesting kind of way of about going things. Because immediately we see, like, especially in this movie, we see like so many wars brewing in this film. Like in the very beginning, we are to see like the Bifrost giants attacking Norway, and then Odin has to come to their defense. We see eventually the Frost giants making their way to sneak into Asgard, and eventually Thor has to retaliate from that because he thinks that he needs to put them in their place, the Jotunheim people. And eventually, like, it really just takes Thor, like, getting out of that bubble of consistent battling to realize, like, well, hey, like, this is not the way to go about things. And plus also he finds out some news that is telling him he needs to stop, or he needs to, like, halter what he's been doing, because eventually, like, he will lose everything if he is to go the way he is to go. So kind of like a coming of age, I guess, story for Thor. I guess it took a really long time, but but yeah. So like immediately when we are to see like young Thor, like immediately all young Thor wants to do is just like beat everyone and like destroy everybody, and like Thor hasn't learned anything since that moment. And so like Odin had, I guess, never really wrangled Thor in at all. He just kept letting him like, oh, just go ahead and just battle and whatever. And I think that was a mistake by Odin. And plus, like, I don't think Odin was ever really grooming anybody to take his place, which he honestly should have. And I honestly think that was a big mistake by Odin of not, like, grooming anybody for taking on his throne. Because really, once Odin does have his Odin sleep, it doesn't feel like there's an efficient enough person to be on the throne. And so basically it's just like, well, here's the last person that has to be just chucked up there, and and that's where things just start to get like out of hand, and like that's where all problems ensue. It's just because Odin just did not train a uh, a replacement good enough. And even into the sequels of this movie, it still feels like Odin never really and truly like trains anyone good enough. It's just being like, well, like, hey, see you guys later. Like, I'm gonna go and do my Odin sleep, or hey, like, and so eventually that just leads to the way things go in Ragnarok. And like I completely blame Odin for that. I don't blame Thor or Loki or anybody. I just blame Odin for all the stuff that happens. Cuz they didn't like he didn't prepare them for anything. Like, and it's obvious with even in this film that like leading up to every single moment, like Thor and Loki have had to do their own journeys to find their own way, and then learn a thing or two, and like mature. Like, so it kind of takes kind of characters getting out of Asgard to eventually become better people, which is a weird thing to do. And so I think that's the maybe the most interesting thing about this movie is like we have Loki who has to go to Thanos and learn a thing or two. We have to have Thor going off to Midgard to learn a thing or two. And eventually it just makes these characters stronger eventually to leave the nest. And like that's an interesting story that these people become better people because they are no longer in Asgard, and eventually once we get into other Thor movies, eventually we'll get to see what happens to Asgard. And really that is just to showcase to us that Asgard was not a good place. It was just a people. So let's get into it. Let's go into spoilers about this movie. Because I think it's about that time to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. So, because I've already been talking about it for 10 minutes, and I probably didn't get much into like the actual cryptic thing of this, but it's either like for all these Marvel movies, in all honesty, it's either you see these movies or you haven't. And most of the time, you honestly have to see every single one of them, and more than likely, you probably might not remember bits and pieces about them, but you'll have seen them at some point in time. There's so many movies to scrape through, and that's why I'm trying to avoid the actual MCU. But it's going to get to that point in time where I'm like, but I want to start finally getting these things done and out of the way. So I think it's time to say let's get into spoilers. So in the very beginning of this, kind of like I built this up to be. So the very beginning of this is the frost giants making their way to Norway and freezing numerous people that are in Norway with their Viking ships and they're kind of like certain time period equipment. And so Odin is to come in and go and take down these frost giants and create a treaty with the king, who's Laufey, and luckily I didn't need to look that up. And King Laufey. And so they are to make a treaty with one another, and so that the Nine Realms can live in peace. So really the big thing uh of Odin was to be able to get their like ice blaster like thing. I don't know what that actual device was, but eventually they are to go and take it and to put it in this chamber of treasures, or whatever it's technically called, their vault of treasures. And Odin is to eventually take both Loki and Thor uh, to this vault and eventually showcase some of the trophies that they had obtained or won or whatever through their time. And really, Thor is just talking about how he just wants to just fight everybody, and just kind of Loki is more or less just kind of watching on. So really this is to push to have Thor, of course, getting his seat at the throne. And we have Thor who's like tossing up his hammer, and everybody's like, wow! And Sif is like, you're such a thing. You're so garbage. like you're just like grandstanding for all these people. Whatever. So Thor is flinging his hammer up, just like showboating. Like, yeah, like look at me. I'm gonna get my throne today. Whoop de doo. And so Thor is making his way to his father for his father to deem him worthy and ask him if he swears to a number of things. And Thor's like, I swear! I swear, I swear! But then all of that is to get interrupted with the frost giants making their way through the vault of treasures to try and get the frost giant's freezing weapon. I don't know what it's called. I don't know. I'm not going to know the technical terms of everything. So I hope people can understand that I probably won't name anything when it comes down to names. I probably won't know everything. I don't know technical terms of whatever, and eventually I will probably have to get corrected by watching another Thor movie, or probably I will probably go into uh like rebuttaling or whatever, but yeah, like it is what it is. So the Frost Giants are to make their way into the trophy vault like thing to get their weapon. And they get pretty close, but eventually the destroyer is to go and wipe them out. The destroyer is to appear in his little hidey hole spot to eventually go and take them all out. And so that stops Thor's coronation to become king of Asgard for a moment. And so Odin and Thor and Loki go down to the vault to just kind of see like what they came there for or how far they gotten. And Odin's like, "Well, hey, like I guess they didn't get what they came here for, so that's perfectly fine. For some reason like they kind of slipped through here. And oh well, like I guess like these people are thieves and they didn't get what they came for, so that's a wrap." And Thor's like, "No, that is not a wrap. Like, look how far they gotten." And Odin's like, "Yeah, they got here, but they didn't leave what they came for, so it doesn't matter." And Thor is like, "No, we need answers. We need to go to Jotunheim and like lessen their ranks and kind of teach them a lesson that they shouldn't try to do this again." And Odin's like, "No, we have a peace treaty. Like, if anything, like this is just a task of a few, and like we're not gonna do that." But here's where we have here's where we have Loki, who's whispering in Thor's ear, just like, "Well, yeah, but like if you don't go, it maybe looks like you're yella." Because that's the stupid thing of Thor. Like, anybody could just, especially right here in this movie, anybody could just persuade and whisper into Thor's ear. It's like, "Well, yeah, but it makes us look bad now, doesn't it?" And Thor's like, "Yeah, I don't want to look bad, so I want to go, and I want to look cool, because I'm Thor. I'm the almighty Thor, so I have to prove so." Like, man, again, like, if he was given king, like, he would just wipe out everybody, and everyone would be dead, and, like the Nine Realms would just have easily fallen apart with this kind of Thor ruling over everyone. So he has to learn something. So Loki is whispering sweet nothings into Thor's ear, and Thor is easily swayed by this to the point of him going to his friends and persuading them after he goes and tips a table over in anger that Thor and them need to go to Jotunheim to teach Laufey a lesson. And so they need to go to the Bifrost to go into Jotunheim. So, because Thor goes and talks to all of his buddies, all of his cronies, Volstagg, Hogan, Fendrel, and Sith, and all tells them, like, "Hey, who was the one that gave you all kinds of, like, food that you, like, thought you died and went to Valhalla?" And Volstagg's like, "You did, Thor." And then, like, consistently, like, Thor is asking, like, every single person, like, what he did for them, and so on and so forth. I don't remember what he did for Vandrel and Hogan, because they're just people to me. But eventually, like if anything, like, Valstagg, like, sticks out just because, like, it seems like he actually does something in this movie where like just Hogan and Vandal are eventually just people that are just there, but I don't care. Like, and eventually Vandal is eventually gonna eventually get a casting change when it comes to the sequel movie. And so yeah, so Vandal to me is just a person that is taking up space, sadly enough. And eventually, like the way that, honestly, like Thor Ragnarok eventually tells us how important the Warriors 3 are, which they're not important at all. And like Sith is just gone, and I'm assuming that she's probably going to come back in Love and Thunder. But like I know she was in Agents of Shield. She was in an episode of that. If you don't know that, go ahead and check out Agents of Shield. Go ahead and maybe specifically check out the one episode that she's in of Agents of Shield, and you'll see like she goes off on her own. So eventually you'll know where that character just bizarrely, I guess, is staying in Midgard, I guess, for however long. So, but then Thor like mentions to Sith, it's like, well, hey, like who was the person that thought like a woman could be like better than everyone else? And Sith is like, well, I did. And it's like, and Thor was like, well, yeah, but I supported you. So, like Thor is kind of like mentioning all these things that are gonna make everybody want to go with Jotunheim with Thor, even though they're just kind of like, yeah, but like, this might like push us into war, and but Thor is like, but wait a minute, we're just gonna just get through all these people, and like it'll be cool. Like King Laufey will just be like, hey man, I'm just gonna bow right down to you, because that's immediately what's gonna happen when they go to Jotunheim, right? That all of a sudden King Laufey is just like, oh man, since Thor is now here, I just need to bow down to him because like I'm gonna apologize and say that I've made so many mistakes, and I'm gonna lick Thor's boots, and it's all gonna be over, right? Thor is dumb. Thor is ignorant. So Thor makes his way on to Jotunheim, and like really that is to be uh, with Heimdall like sending them there, and so they go off to Jotunheim, and so Thor is to speak to Loki about what had happened, or Thor is to speak to Laufey, not Loki, Laufey about what had happened, and King Laufey is just like, yeah, so who cares? It's like Laufey doesn't give a crap. It's like, so what? Like, to where, like, eventually Laufey is just mentioning how, like, childish Thor is. It's like, well, so what? Like, and then eventually we start to see, like, how really childish really Thor is, because eventually numbers start to compile of all these frost giants. And Thor is just like, well, like I think he was like trying to ask for an apology from King Laufey. And King Laufey's like, no. So, like, I don't care. Like, so what? So my people had made it to Asgard. Whoop-de-doo. It's like, if anything, like, you shouldn't come here and, like, you shouldn't come to me like a brat and just, like, mention how, like there's some sand that got in your eye, and now like you're gonna come here and come to me and like complain about it. Like, I don't care. So eventually Thor starts to walk away because Loki is telling them that they're outnumbered. Loki is trying to like push away because he's starting to see like things stacked up, and Like Thor can basically think that he can beat anyone and he can beat everyone. And that's the problem with Thor is he like won't say no to anything. And he won't realize that there's always a strategy involved to everything. He just thinks that he can punch his way through everything. And that eventually is what happens to a lot of his friends, is that his friends end up getting hurt along the way, while Thor is still thinking that he can beat everyone. Because he can just fly out of everything, where not everybody has that luxury. So, and that's what makes Thor dumb in this movie. So, Thor eventually is to turn back and just decide, well, hey, maybe I'll go and I'll talk to them another day, or maybe I'll go and, like, I will just, like, try and, like, just intimidate them. Maybe that's what I'll do here. And then all of a sudden, like, we have a frost giant that is to say to Thor, like, go along home, princess. And so Thor is like, no, like, I will not be mocked in your Jotunheim. So Thor just starts beating the crap out of all of these frost giants, and all of the other Asgardians are like, oh crap, like, I didn't want to fight these people because they're freaking, like, there's a lot of numbers here. And plus, also, Laufey has an unlimited army, and the Asgardians just have the Warriors 3, Loki, and Thor. Because they're going here without the permission of Odin and Asgard. So we're to go on here and have Thor go and like really be wiping all of these guys out. Like, he is going through and hammering through all of these characters, and it looks pretty awesome. But here's the thing, like, some of his friends are starting to get injured. We have Valstag, who ends up getting a touch from one of these guys and ends up, like, hurting his arm. And he's like, don't let him touch you! And we eventually have Fandral, who eventually is to start, like, fighting against these guys, and he thinks that everything is going well until he gets stabbed with an icicle in the chest. And so, yeah, like, a lot of their friends are starting to get hurt. And, like, so, and you can honestly see that, like, Loki is, like trying to use every trick to his bag. And eventually one of the frost giants is to touch Loki, and all of a sudden his hand is turned blue, making him realize that I guess he is not an actual Asgardian after all, that it seems like he is some mix of things. This frost giant is to notice Loki's hand turning blue, like, huh? And Loki kills this guy, so that way there's no real true evidence of Loki being a frost giant. So, or a frost giant-ish person. So, everybody starts, like, running off while Thor is still fighting on all these frost giants and all of the people of Jotunheim. So, like, Fandral is shoved over the back of Volstagg, and they make their way to, like, the farthest part of battle, and eventually there's this giant, frost giant beast of a thing. Like, it looks like this huge dog-ish, like, thing, and it's, like, kind of gaining on the Asgardians, and eventually Thor decides, like, well, like, I think I fought enough Odenheim people for the day. I guess I'm just going to go and finally just fly off and meet my friends. And so once Thor is to meet his friends, it's to basically take out this giant dog of a thing and, like, ram his body through a hole in this dog, this giantish, like, dog, for it to get killed over. And I don't have the specific name for this dog-ish, like, creature. And I know some people might correct me with names, and that's perfectly okay. Because when looking at it, a lot of people will just say, oh yeah, that's such and such name, because they have Google at hand. Like, I'm just going in here, just going like, this is the one thing that I don't think I need to desperately know. Because if anything, in like Thor Ragnarok, like I try to have like all names for all kinds of things, like Surtur and like all this stuff, and eventually you'll see that review come out eventually because uh and I think I really did a lot of research in that spot too, of like knowing where everything is. And like I think that review was so much fun for me. So eventually you guys will see that, and eventually you'll probably see a guy that has much more hair than he did before, but that's just because Asgard. Anyways, Asgard is a timeless thing. You never know what kind of time period. What? Anyway, moving on. So Thor came with to meet the Asgardians, and so all of a sudden we have King Laufey's men like gaining on the Asgardians, and so the Asgardians are now calling for Heimdall. Heimdall, we need a swift exit. And so Odin is to pop on down and just be like, hey, everybody. Like, I wanted to take a vacation in Jotunheim, but what's all this? No, Odin found out what had happened, and so he's coming on down to tell Thor to shut up. Because Thor is like, yeah, father, you're here, we'll take them together. And Odin's like, shut up. And so Odin is now like trying to remember for Laufey that they have this treaty together. And Laufey is like, well, your son came here for war, so like the treaty is off. Like, your son came in here and destroyed my people, so there has to be a dividends for that. Like, there has to be, like, a thing of that, and that's going to have to be war. So, actually, I guess the thing was called a frost beast. I guess the thing was a frost beast. So it wasn't a big dog, it was a frost beast. So it's not a frost giant, it's a frost beast. So I corrected that. If that's not exactly the name, then oh well, but it's a frost beast. We got it. We figured it out. But anyways, so Jodin is like, well, or Jodin. Odin, I'm getting all the names just kind of blips and bloops. There's a whole lot of ill-pronouncing hard names to talk about. So Odin is like, well, okay, then we'll have war because Thor, again, stupid. So Odin takes all the Asgards back to Asgard, and so now he is just, like, sick of Thor. Odin feels like Thor had betrayed him and kind of done something without his consent and kind of went behind his back. So Odin is just kind of like, you know what? Like, you need to grow up, and you need to go to a place where there isn't war happening to learn a thing or two. Because really just Thor and Odin are just fighting it out. Loki is trying to like just be like, well, hey, and Odin's like, shut up. Like, I'm not talking to you, Loki, because this is Thor's movie. You'll get your time in the sun. Loki show. So Odin is talking to Thor and like mentioning that he's a greedy boy and that like he's a stubborn, greedy boy, and that and Thor says it's like, well, you're an old man and you're a fool. Like, oh, a fool am I? An old man am I? Well, I have, like, luckily I have the power to just strip you of everything, strip you of your power, strip you of Mjolnir, and like banish you from Asgard until you learn a thing or two. Like that's the power I possess because I'm an old man and a fool. So Thor rips and shreds the power from Thor and makes him mortal and kicks him off to Midgard and tosses Mjolnir into the thing with Thor to be at Midgard, but it's not going to appear in the same spot as Thor. So, in the very beginning of this movie, we are to see Natalie Portman and all of her people. So Natalie Portman is Jane Foster. We have Eric Selvig. We have Darcy, and so they are going and trying to find a sky anomaly or an Einstein's Rosen bridge, and like they're trying to like they seem to have all these like things of weird weather patterns that they've been seeing on Earth, and so this is the most unique-ish looking one that they could kind of like stamp their flag and say like, yeah, like this is ours. So Jane, Darcy, and Eric are in their car, and Jane is having Darcy drive wildly right into this Rosen Bridge esh like thing, and Jane is pushing Darcy to drive so wildly to eventually just accidentally bump into Thor, just basically knock him off his feet, and because he hits right into the car, he smacks into it and he bounces back off, and so Jane is like, "Oh my god." Like, we hit something. I wasn't expecting that. So Jane goes out of her car and is to mention that, like, please don't be dead. Like, and Darcy is like, well, you're the one who made me do, like, drive the way I did, so this is probably all going to be on you, not on me if he dies. So, so Thor is to wake up and he's like, hammer! And Darcy's like, yeah, we can definitely tell you're hammered. He's like, hammer! I love the way that Thor pronounces stuff in this movie or any movie. It's just really fun. Like, especially these like early things when he used to pronounce all this stuff, like Idrisil and like the tree of Idrisil and all these kind of like funny things that he has to say. Except for when we get to like Ragnarok, where he's like, and that's what heroes do, and it's like that's kind of a stupid saying, but there's also other kind of funny things that eventually he says. But so Thor is on his way to be saying Hammer, and that is to lead where Thor is asking like where this is. Like, is it like Mospelheim or some other kind of weird kind of realm or whatever, or Nickelheim or Buttheim or Slappyheim, whatever he asks of where this is. And so they're just like, no, it's New Mexico, like it's Earth. And he's like, oh, Midgard, oh yeah. So Thor is to eventually just be kind of like rocking. He's just kind of like, whoa. And so it gets to the point where Darcy is just kind of a little like taken off guard with Thor, and eventually she just tasers him. And so like Thor like drops like a rock, and so that pushes us on to eventually just send Thor to the hospital so that way he can get checked over and also get a mental check over, because this guy does not sound like he's mentally coherent. So So Mjolnir or Meow Meow or Meow Meow or like what does Darcy call it? Like Meow Meow? Like I think she calls her Mimia. So Mjolnir is to eventually crash land onto a spot that everyone is all deciding that they need to go and try to lift it. Like it's that classic like Excalibur, King Arthur story where everybody has to go and lift this sword out of this rock. It's kind of that same kind of story that they're trying here. So there's a bunch of hillbillies or a bunch of just like drunken guys that all decide that like, hey, we want to figure out what this thing is, and so we have to lift it. And bizarrely, people are saying that it's some like kind of satellite piece or something like that. That's maybe why it has to be so heavy or so unable to move. And so eventually, Stan Lee gets his truck out and tries to like take a chain to Mjolnir and tries to like drive it out, and that just destroys this truck. And then Stanley is like, well, did it work? And it didn't. So, like, everybody's just crowding around this one spot, getting drunk off their butt, but eventually trying to lift this thing and no one can. Like, dude, there's even like superheroes that can't actually lift this thing. But eventually Coulson is to see people gathering around this spot, and that is when we are to see Coulson, I guess, calling Fury like he did in some other film. I think it's one of the, like, I want to say it's probably one of the Iron Man films. Like, there's some cutscene where they talk about Thor's hammer getting spotted. I could be wrong, but I know it's in some cutscene of some movie. And people can quite possibly correct me because I don't remember. I know it's in some cutscene of some film, but I don't know exactly which one it is. It could be Iron Man, or it could be like it. No, I think maybe Iron Man sets up the Nick Fury thing. It might have. It might be. Maybe it's Iron Man 2? I don't know. Like, people can correct me. That's perfectly fine. Hopefully, people don't litter this thing with comments of like, "Oh yeah, it's definitely that one thing." Like, if someone says it, then that's perfectly fine. But hopefully, nobody copies and pastes that afterwards. But still, that actually helps the that helps the channel by just like blatantly, like repetitiously going into the comment section and just berating it with the same comment over and over and over, because the video goes and does well anyways. Like, I can have that just really be proof by other things where people will go and do the same comment like 30 to 40 some odd times. And I'm like, yeah, like this video is gonna do well. Just because of the consistent comment or correcting or whatever, which is perfectly fine. Because I like I'm doing all these movies out of order, so I can understand when eventually somebody will correct me on something. Because I'm not watching these in order. I'm just kind of choosing whichever movie to watch at a certain time. So let's get in more into this. Blah, blah, blah. Let's get more into. Blah, blah. Let's get into it. Let's get into this thing. So Thor is to make his way to the doctor to easily have people take him down and to put sleeping medication into Thor to knock him out. And like, it's kind of funny how like Thor thinks he's like so strong in this hospital, and he's like, "You won't get to me. I'm the mighty Thor." He falls over. It's like, it's hilarious. So Thor eventually is to get strapped into this bed, but eventually he easily gets out of it, just because he just figures out to like get out strengthened of these restraints. So eventually, Jane and Eric and Darcy are to eventually come to the consensus is like okay, like the stuff that this guy was talking about, like Ein like was talking about the Bifrost and was talking about like Thor and Loki and all this stuff. Like Eric is trying to like mention how like this stuff doesn't actually make sense, and all of it is from a uh, like a like a child's story, and there's no way that this guy could be rationally telling us the truth. Eventually, Eric is to go into a library and find this book about Norse mythology, and so he starts like thumbing through it and starts laughing at it because he's like, "God, this is all childish stuff, and why am I taking this as evidence of anything?" Uh, but he takes it anyways to show it to Jane and Darcy to say like how much of a joke it really is. And but then Jane and Darcy are going in and just like, well, you know what? Like sometimes we have to like look at things differently than we were to think of them. Like we sometimes have to like kind of look at all kind of possibilities before we like disprove anything. That's kind of what Jane is kind of going into. That so eventually Darcy is to kind of go through all the photos that they had taken of when the Einstein Rosenbridge thing was to come into fray, and Darcy is to notice there was some shadow of a man within that cloud. And Jane is like, "Oh my god, more than likely Thor was probably that thing that came from that cloud." And so like Jane is like, "Oh my god, like my discovery is now in a hospital somewhere, and like I could go and take this guy and figure out like how he came out of this." So Jane has to make her way back to this hospital to gather up Thor. And also like when Thor is to eventually make his way to get tasered by Darcy, they are to give him or no wait, blah, 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 blah. He has clothes. So eventually when he makes to the hospital, they have to re-give him clothes. Okay. Like I'm trying to rethink my steps here of this film. So Thor leaves the hospital with just a gown on. Jane, Eric, and Darcy are to go back to the hospital to find Thor and realize that he has left. And so now they're like, "Oh my god, like we we just basically took our treasure chest that we found and we just like threw it away." like we dug up this treasure and then just like took it and just tossed it in the ocean. And I'm like, well, like maybe someone else will find it. Like, I guess we don't need gold and diamonds and jewels all that badly. Like, they're kind of just tossing out their treasure chest they just found. So so Thor is to go and bump into Jane, Eric, and Darcy yet again because Jane runs Thor over yet again with her car, smacking him and then backing over Thor almost and almost like taking him down. And so Jane stops her car yet again and she's like, "Oh my god, I want to let you know I'm not doing this on purpose." Like consistently crashing into Thor with her car. Like I think the very first time I watched these scenes, like I had a good laugh at them because like especially if this is like your first ever watching, like these spots where Thor just keeps getting hit by this car is hilarious. And I think every time I saw him, or every time I saw him in the very first original watching, I laughed. It was fun. Just for Thor to consistently, sadly enough, hit by this car repetitiously. So So after Coulson is to seal off the Mjolnir site, also we have Coulson, who is also going to seal all information that has any tying to what had happened to get Mjolnir here, which is to relate to Jane Foster's work. So once they come back with Thor and kind of clothe him up and get him to go to some diner to have him get sustenance because his mortal form is weak. And so, like, Thor is just, like, sipping drinks. And he's like, I love this. And so he breaks it onto the ground. And he's like, give me more. And, like, Jane is like, yeah, I get that you like it, but why did you have to break it? He's like, well, like, because I enjoyed it. And Jane is like, yeah, that's great and all. And Darcy's also mentioning how, like, Thor had eaten an entire box of Pop-Tarts, but Thor is still hungry to the point of him, like, scarfing down all these waffles. So when they are to come back to the this site of their information, or their all of their stuff, eventually Coulson is to confiscate all of it and just be like, well, yeah, like, all of this is to me now property of Shield. And Jane is like, well, hey, like, I like it's either I have all this information all in this book or all in this, like, lab, and you're taking all of it. And Coulson is like, yep, even the notebook that you have. So Thor is to eventually talk to these drunken, like, people when they're in this diner, and they are to mention about this site that is to have some satellite piece, and Thor is to immediately assume that that is actually Mjolnir, and so he is going to head there. That's why Thor is not with Jane and Darcy and Eric when their stuff is being seized, because Thor is making his way to Mjolnir. And so when Thor is going to the pet shop to find where a horse is, or a animal large enough to ride, eventually when Thor is to come back and realize all this stuff had been taken, Thor is like, well, hey, like, I will go there where Mjolnir is and take back my hammer and take back all your research. So Thor is to go and make his way to Mjolnir, and also with a bunch of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, like Agent Sitwell is in this movie, where a lot of people might know him much more from the Captain America Winter Soldier movie, because he's kind of much more frequently used in that film rather than this one. So, and people might know where that guy heads, especially once we get into Winter Soldier. But anyways, so Thor is to make his way and just barrel through all of these S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives. And here's the thing. Like, we have Coulson that eventually, when Thor is taken, eventually mentions how, like, Thor is really skilled. But when Thor actually starts going through these S.H.I.E.L.D. guys, I'm like, it doesn't really seem all that well that, like, Thor is actually really all that well trained. Like, it doesn't feel like he's using any, like, cool techniques or whatever. It just seems like he's brute strengthening everybody. And so it's really not that, like, Thor is skilled at all. It's just that he, like, I don't think I ever see him actually, like, skilled in any kind of way. I think he mostly just brute strengths everything, and that's how he wins everything, is just his Thor-like power. But if anything else, he just kind of flings people around, and that's training. That's, like, I don't quite get that. And plus, a lot of times I just kind of saw Thor just kind of punching people or whatever. I don't see any actual, like, combat technique that Thor was actually using that I thought, like, yeah, like there is some real like combinations of things that Thor is really using. Like it just seems like he just outmuscles all these guys. So Thor outmuscles a bulk of these people, like flings them around, like tosses them over his shoulder, kind of thing. And so eventually Thor is to get to one supposedly big security guard, but Thor, of course, has fought bigger. So Thor is to, of course, just kind of like have this guy kind of grab him from behind. But eventually Thor is to kind of like elbow him a couple decent times and like get this guy to let him go. And like so Thor like is kind of using like some like kind of like strategy or what, but like this is kind of, this feels like common stuff to me. Like this doesn't feel like a soldier of fortune, or like this guy has like some karate skill that I like. It's not like he's doing roundhouse kicking anybody or doing that anytime soon. Like I honestly wish that eventually we could have a Thor that like seemed as scary as Captain America was in The Winter Soldier. Like that first fight scene when Captain America is just a blaze through this entire ship, that was scary. That was intimidating. Like Thor is just kind of like, well, yeah, like he's strong because of like his power, but take that away and like he's just a strong guy. He's not a guy that you're going to say like, wow, like this guy is a huge threat. Because I think if you were to have taken like Thor without his powers against like a quite possible like Iron Fist like character without his Iron Fist power, Iron Fist would probably take Thor down, in all honesty. But who knows? It would be cool to kind of see like Iron Fist versus Thor, like with like both of them using Mjolnir and the Iron Fist, but really like Thor wouldn't fly or Thor wouldn't use his lightning power, and like eventually just see how the fight would go. Because I just kind of want to see like the combat skill that, or like Thor having to forcibly do strategy for once. So let's move on. So Thor is to make it to Mjolnir, and Hawkeye is up in this little pouch of a thing where he's just kind of like having his arrow out, and Hawkeye is telling Coulson, it's like, hey, like, are you gonna let me take this guy out because he's just like thrashing through all of your guys. It's freaking hilarious, and I'm actually rooting for him right now. And so Hawkeye wants the call, but Coulson won't give it. Coulson wants to see what is going to happen if Thor is to grab Mjolnir. Thor grabs for it, and he is to try to lift it, and he can't because he hasn't earned it yet. And so Thor is just like, ah! He's like yelling at the sky because he's like, why can't I just pick this back up? Because you're a child who's whining and crying. You're a baby that's like all just like having a hissy fit when something isn't going your way. And so now you have to grow up. You have to grow up. You have to now earn this hammer all over again. So Thor is to realize that, hey, like, I guess I'm not going to go anywhere, so I might as well be collected by Coulson and have him interrogate me to ask where exactly I am from. Coulson comes into this room and is to ask Thor, like, this kind of feels like a very flimsy room, and it feels like anybody could have just gotten out of this room. Let me pause here for a second. Let me do a reset. All right, so Coulson is to ask where Thor is from, to say that it seems that Thor has taken every single person that he has and has turned every single person that Coulson is to have into like low grade mall cops. And so I guess that's my phone has just turned off, so we're gonna do this without any whatsoever stuff, so that's great. So it's kind of halfway through the movie, so I think I'll be fine. So Coulson is to say, like, well, hey, like, it seems like you're like a soldier of fortune. Like, where have you come from? South Africa? Like, where are you from? And so Thor is not really saying anything. So Coulson is like, well, like, we'll be here as long as it'll take for us to get answers. So Coulson leaves, and Loki is to appear. And Thor is to say, like, oh, brother, you're here. And Loki is to basically come there with bad news. And so Thor is like, well, like, are you here to bring me home? And have you talked to father? And Loki's like, well, our father is dead. Like, your banishment and the fear of war has killed him. And like your exiling had let us be able to like keep the treaty between Jotunheim and Asgard, and mother wants you banished forever. Loki is feeding him this information because Loki right now is technically the king of Asgard, because Odin had gone into the Odin sleep because he has been weighing and been very tired for a while now. And so now Loki is being the king of Asgard, so technically he's calling the shots. Technically he's going to Heimdall, and Heimdall is to eventually be upset with Loki because, like, hey, how is it that all of a sudden these frost giants got here without me knowing it? Like, how they slipped by me. That seems like a very odd thing. And Loki's like, well, there's several other ways to get to Asgard or anywhere else without the need of your services, Heimdall, and the Bifrost. So Loki is also to go to Jotunheim and talk to King Laufey, and is to mention kind of what his play is. That eventually Loki wants Jotun to go to Asgard and kill off Odin, and because basically Loki is a person of Jotunheim anyways. He is the son of Laufey. And when Loki is to go to the Vault of Treasures or Vault of Relics, Loki is to touch onto the Bifrost weapon and realize that his whole body is to turn into a Bifrost character. And eventually Loki is to confront Odin about it, mentioning that, am I cursed? And Odin is to finally submit to Loki that that he had found Loki while being at Jotunheim, and he thought that, or Odin said that it might have been a good way to try to have peace between Asgard and Jotunheim by having Loki there to eventually just like create peace, because Loki would be an ambassador of Jotunheim. But when was Odin ever going to tell Loki about him being a Bifrost character? I guess never. And like that's the whole thing. Like, we have Odin who just like does stuff out of impulse, but then never really like he never like does anything like Odin makes, I think, a ton of mistakes. Just so many mistakes. And then when having to finally be confronted with those mistakes, Odin is just like, well, I thought that like we could have done something with this, but I just didn't really like I was too lazy to actually just come up with that actual like plan, or I thought that like I could just delay this as much as humanly possible, like delaying a really good king for Asgard, because Odin just thought that he might have had just another year, or he might have just had more time, and really like Odin was never brooming a king. Odin was never brooming Loki to be a ambassador. Odin was never like what was Odin doing? Was there too many battles to wane that like Odin's mistakes just kept piling up? Like that kind of feels very obvious, especially once we get to Ragnarok, that like Odin has continued to have this plethora of failures or a plethora of mistakes that he just let them consistently go on and on and on until he realized that, yeah, like maybe I should finally do something about this, or maybe it'll have to forcibly be a thing that has to unravel and then I have to deal with it. Like, I think that's like Loki's or Odin's way of doing things is just like, I guess I have to finally mention it when eventually it actually has to forcibly come up. So, it is what it is with Odin. So, Thor is to so let's get back to the Thor part. So Thor is to talk to Loki and mention how like he's banished and how father's dead and how Asgard is quite possibly still on the brink of war, and but eventually like father's dead and all the family members are just like all distraught about all this. And so but Thor is like, well, can I come home? And Loki's like, no, like you can't. And so Loki's also telling Thor, it's like, well, this is probably going to be the last time I'm going to talk to you. And Thor is like, well, okay, well, goodbye, brother. And once Loki is to leave, Coulson is to come back, like, goodbye, like, I just got here. Like, I need to find out more information about you. So, so Eric is going to make his way to retrieve Thor and eventually try to like figure out a way to like falsify some licenses and documents to say that Thor is some other person to try to get like Thor out of there, because again like a thing of treasure that's just going to land in the hands of Shield and all their people. Eric's trying to avoid that. So Eric scoops Thor up and just mentions that he's like a fitness nut and like he's bound on steroids. And so Thor found out about all the stuff that they had taken. And so Thor had gotten upset and went after them. And so that's what led us to this part. So Shield realizes all this stuff that they are to have on Thor that it was given to Eric was falsified documents, but they're like, we'll just let this go. We'll just see how this plays out. So Eric and Thor are to immediately go to a bar, and Eric is to tell like Thor, it's like, you know what? I know you're probably doing the right thing, but if anything, like you're also just kind of like this is probably going to be the last time we're going to do you a favor. Like, this is going to be the last, like, you need to go on your own way. You need to do your own journey and see where that heads. But, like, if anything, we really just can't, like, waste time on fairy tales and fantasy. We need to get back to what we're really and truly, like, doing here? Like we need to like rebuild from the ground up what we're doing, because and eventually Thor is to give Jane back her notebook so that way Jane doesn't have to start from ground zero and work her way back up. So, but both Thor and Eric get like, well, Eric gets like really, really drunk, but Thor just can drink for the best of them. So Eric is being carried by Thor back to Jane Foster's spot, and so Eric is to be like just pass out from being drunk, and Eric is like, "You may not be the god of thunder, but I want you to be, or I wish that you be." Um, so both Jane and Thor are having their little moment together where they're going to talk about the tree of Yggdrasil and like talk about how all the nine realms are kind of connected. It kind of honestly feels that um, the way that actually like Thor draws this out, it kind of seems very like complicated, or it's like I've seen other like pictures of the tree of Vitrasil or Yggdrasil. Like it's IGG Yggdrasil, like YGGDRASIL, close to spelling it. You can see other pictures of Yggdrasil, the tree of Yggdrasil, and like see how it's kind of broken down. Um, but kind of the way that like Thor draws it, it's like there's just a bunch of like planets and they're all connected by these all these branches, and I guess that is to technically be the Bifrost. That is to just kind of like connect all of them. Like every realm has this like Bifrost like connection. Like every spot has a way of connecting to the other planet or space or whichever. Eventually, so Thor explains that to Jane, and and Thor is also to mention it's like, yeah, there's some stuff that you call science and I call magic, and there's a place where it's one and the same. So this all leads to eventually the Destroyer making its way onto Midgard, but also so are the Warriors 3 and Sith making their way to Earth, because really they're like, dude, we need Thor here. Like, if anything, like Loki's rule, like, is gonna just destroy Asgard, and so we need to go to find Thor to bring him back, even though technically he should not be coming back to Asgard because technically he's still banished by Odin. The Warriors 3 and Sith go to Loki to try and change Loki from Thor's banishment, and Loki is like, well, I'm not coming here to change orders from Odin. Like, I'm just coming in here to just rule over everybody, and that's my whole plan, is to just see, like, how things are going, and to not, like, recant certain things that happened in the past because people need MCU continuity. Yeah. So the Warriors 3 and Sith are just like, dude, we're just gonna go anyways. Like, we're gonna go and get Thor because it's the right thing to do. So they go to the Bifrost and basically they tell Heimdall what's all going on. And so Heimdall is like, well, so you're gonna commit treason against technically our king of Asgard that it's technically right now, and you're gonna go and get Thor because you guys really want Thor here, and like I'm gonna go and just let you do that, but I am not going to uh, shift my sword to have you go and like get there. They're like, what? But eventually they go through the Bifrost anyways and make their way to uh, Thor, and so they're like, found you. And so Thor is like hugging all his friends and is like, yeah, like why is it that all you guys are here? And they're like, well, we're here to bring you back. And Thor is like, well, I can't go back. Like, Odin's dead, and everything that Loki had told him, he's repeating to them. And they're like, Odin isn't dead. And, like, a lot of other things are just kind of like not like what we thought it would be when Loki would be asleep. And so, like, Jane is hearing what Thor said, that he's banished from his world, and Jane is like, oh my god, maybe there is some truth to this, because why are these people wearing all this bizarre armor? It seems kind of weird. So Thor is just like, so everything that I was told was a lie, and like Loki has betrayed me. I don't care if like I don't care if I don't have powers. I'm gonna go back to Asgard and beat the crap out of Loki because of the things that he'd lied about, like the horrible things that he had told me. So, so we have the destroyer that arrives in New Mexico, and is to just start just go and come down, and all of a sudden the shield people are all like circling this destroyer, and like some people are thinking it's like, well, is this Tony's work, is this Stark's work? And Coulson is like, he never tells me anything. And so the destroyer goes and blasts in these shield people, and they're like, maybe it's not Stark's. So the destroyer is to make his way to where Thor is. And so like Thor is telling everybody like maybe you guys can like stall this thing, but if anything, I'm just immortal now, and if anything, I'll just be in the way, or I might get one of you guys killed. So what I'm going to try to do while you guys are going to try to take this thing down, I'm going to go and I'm going to try to like get people like to safety. And so like Eric, Darcy, and Jane are all like trying to scatter everybody to get them to safety. And so like the Warriors 3 and Sith like are trying to like Sith is going off, and the Warriors 3 are trying to distract this thing, like jumping onto it and try to hit it, but there isn't much they can do. But Sith eventually goes and takes her like bladed stick like thing. I don't know exactly what that's called, and like she drives it into the destroyer, but the destroyer just like turns around and then just like gets like Sith basically off its back. Well, technically, with the way that it rotates, it's technically its stomach, but regardless. So the the destroyer like just kind of just starts taking down all of the warriors, and so Thor has to do the right thing now, and he's like, well, like Loki, I don't know like why you're here, and I don't know why that you are doing this, but like if anything, like I'm sure that you probably come here for me. So let's just end this now, and instead of having to kill all these innocents, just take me and just have this be done. And so the destroyer is to basically just kick Thor and kick him really hard to where he is to basically just fall back. And now Jane and everybody are just like, oh my god, like, and like Thor is like, it's done now, like I'm done, we finished, like we won. And so the destroyer is to go back into Asgard, and Thor is to die. So all of a sudden, Mjolnir is to appear, come flying at Thor, because now I guess technically he be worthy. So Mjolnir is coming all up in him. And so Mjolnir is coming to Thor, and now Thor is to reappear with all of his Thor gear on. And Jane is like, oh my god! And so Thor becomes Thor yet again with true Thor gear on. And she's like, well, like, is this normally how you look? And he's like, more or less. And she's like, it's a good look. So, bizarrely. So, Thor is to mention to Jane, it's like, well, hey, do you want to go and you want to see that Einstein's Rosen bridge that you've talked so much about? And Jane is like, yeah, I want to see that. Like, let me see some of that. And so Thor is to go back where the Warriors 3 had, like, came from. And so Thor is now asking for Heimdall. Sadly enough, because of Heimdall's betrayal, Loki had frozen Heimdall right by the Bifrost, and then just had all the frost giants come on in to go and try to kill off Odin. And so King Laufey is to go and kill Odin. Odin while he sleeps. He's like popping his eye open. Is like, hey, like I know full well that you would, like, yeah, you can sleep, but evidently you can hear and see anything. So I want to make sure that you know that I was the person who killed you. And so Laufey goes for the killing blow. Loki goes and kills Laufey. And so we have Renee Russo's character, Odin's wife, who comes to Loki and is like, "Oh my God! Like you saved your father from death. So good for you, Loki. Like good that you did something finally. Uh, like finally you were productive because it's not your fault. It's Odin's fault. It's Odin's failures. So." So Heimdall is just kind of like trying to get out of his like ice baby, like frozen tundra, whatever. So Heimdall is to do like that's taken some while for him to shake out of that whole thing. So give him some credit. Like he like that was difficult to be frozen and try to get unfrozen. So Heimdall is to eventually put his sword in to let all the Asgardians come in so they can fight Loki. And so Loki goes, or Loki. Why do I keep saying Loki for everything? I guess because too much of the Loki show is just getting me to think of his name all the time. Thor goes to get to Loki, and like now we have this fight out of Thor knows that he has lied, and so now here's the big fight. So, uh, so Loki is to make his way to the Bifrost and is to eventually like take the Bifrost and like try to destroy Jotunheim with it and like annihilate that planet, but also I guess while doing that, it's probably going to also destroy Asgard as well. But so this Bifrost is to take out Jotunheim because it's to remain open. And so Loki is running after, or God, Thor is running after Loki, trying to break this this ice like Bifrost that is frozen over. Loki tries to stop Thor, and then they have this fight out where Loki is telling Thor, it's like, what made you so soft? Like, don't tell me it was Midgard. Don't tell me it was that woman. Maybe after I kill you, I'm going to go back to Midgard and see why that woman had made you so soft and why you are so different, brother. So Loki and Thor are to have this fight out, and eventually that is to lead them to fight on the Rainbow Bridge. And so this fight is to continue on, where Loki is continuously using tricks to try to like kind of confuse Thor, but Thor is using his thunder power to like negate all of Loki's tricks, because eventually Loki is to fall off almost the Rainbow Bridge, and Thor is trying to retrieve him and help him because brother, but Loki is to trick him and then appear from behind Thor and then like Thor is to get knocked down, but then all of a sudden Loki is to multiply himself, but Thor is to use lightning power to negate all of that. And so eventually, once Thor is to have Loki like knocked on his butt, Loki or Loki is down, so Thor is taking his hammer and putting it on top of Loki, so Loki can't move it. So Thor is seeing the Rainbow Bridge and is seeing the Bifrost, and he's like, I gotta do something about this. So Thor is to take his hammer and then break the Rainbow Bridge, which is to break the Bifrost. And Loki is like, oh my god, you're a moron. Like, if you do that, you'll never see her again. And Thor is like, well, like, I'm sorry, Jane, but I need to do this. So Thor breaks the Rainbow Bridge, which is to have both Loki and Thor, like, almost falling off the Rainbow Bridge. So Odin is to appear to grab both, or to grab Thor, who's grabbing onto Loki. And Loki is to mention that he thought he was doing the right thing for Odin and for Thor and for all of them. And Odin's like, no, Loki, that wasn't the right thing to do. And so, since Loki is realizing that now he has failed and is never going to win over his father's love, because I think that's the real true driving force of why Loki has become a villain in this film, is not getting his father's love. Loki just decides to stop holding on to his staff and let go, and to just be driven to the black hole that it was the Bifrost and anything else. So Odin and Loki are to see like Loki be sent away, and they assume that he is going to be dead, so they mourn his loss. So now Loki and Odin are in Asgard, and basically Odin is in Thor. Tongue-tied in this one. Odin and Thor are now in Asgard. Loki is presumed dead. And, like, names. Good God, names. So, Sif is to tell Thor's mother that Thor is really mourning the loss of his brother, but also mourning the loss that he thinks that he's lost Jane forever. And so Thor is to make his way to Heimdall and see what Heimdall is going to say about what Jane is doing. Heimdall is to mention to Thor that that Heimdall is looking and seeing Jane, and seeing that Jane is trying to find Thor. And so that's just kind of the way that this movie just ends and rattles off and whatever. But yeah, like, I think that's all that I wanted to cover for in this movie, and I want to get the heck out of here. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.